God's story, your life. Unfolding short stories.
I'm Cindy Brinker Simmons, and when I was 12 years old, I was seated on a very uncomfortable pew seat in church next to my 10-year-old sister Brenda to my left and my wonderful dad to my right. And we had just buried my mom. Oh, it was such a hard time for the Brinker family. We had lost the joy that was the energy of our family. And not only were we grieving, but the entire world was grieving with us, because even though Mom was just known to Brenda and me as Mom, she was known to her adoring public in the 1950s as the tennis champion Maureen Connolly, also known as Little Mo. Mom was number one in the world in tennis in 1952, 53, and 54. She won Wimbledon 3 times in a row. And she was the first woman and still the only American woman today to win the calendar Grand Slam, which is winning the Australian, French, Wimbledon, and U.S. championships in one calendar year. She accomplished that in 1953, and she was only 18 years old at the time. You know, just to even put it in perspective, only 5 players in tennis have ever won the calendar Grand Slam. In her last year of competitive play, Mom didn't even lose a tennis match. But unfortunately, there was one opponent she couldn't beat, and it was cancer. And there we were, having just buried this beautiful, talented mom and wife. And I really thought that God hated me. I thought for some reason I had done something so bad, so terrible, so unforgiving, that I was incurring the wrath of an angry God. I don't know why I thought that, but that's where I parked my 12-year-old heart. I really thought that God hated me. And you know what? I wasn't very crazy about him either. And maybe sometimes you felt that way. Maybe you felt like God is indifferent or inconsistent or inactive. Maybe he doesn't hear your prayers, much less answers them. Well, that's where I was. I really thought that God hated me. But life goes on, and we managed as a family to regroup. Graduated from high school, I graduated from college. And during my high school years, my dad introduced me to a daughter of a pastor, because what I had done to earn back the love of a God that I thought really didn't like me, I performed. And I thought I had to earn back his love by performing, and not just by performing, but performing well. You know, because I had grown up in a family of winners. My mom was number one in the world. My dad was a very outstanding athlete. He was in the Olympics in the modern pentathlon. I mean, I just thought that God couldn't love a loser. So I had to perform well. So I was on this performance track, kind of like a hamster in that wheel that keeps running. There's an illusion of momentum, but you know what? You're not going anywhere. And that little hamster was pooped. And so was I, just of trying to win back the love of God. So when I met this daughter of a pastor, I was 16 years old, and I was really broken. And she told me that I didn't have to earn God's love. As a matter of fact, that God loved me as much today as when I was born, loved my mom as much as when she was hoisting that Wimbledon trophy over her head, as when she breathed her last breath. He loved me just as I was. And not only that, but we couldn't earn our way into heaven. And not only that, that because God expects righteous people to enter heaven, that the sacrifice was that God sacrificed his son, Jesus Christ, to die an agonizing death on a cross for me. That was just mind-boggling to me, that I could be loved that much. So that night, I did accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. Well, life went on. And when I graduated from college, I came back and was involved with all kinds of activities and was working, had a robust career. And a wonderful man stepped into my life, Bob Simmons. And we dated for a number of years, got married, had a wonderful child, a young son, William. And then Bob, my husband, heard 3 terrifying words: "You have cancer." And again, that cancer just came assaulting our family, just came into our inner sanctum yet once again with a very grim prognosis. But this time it was different. I knew God loved me. This time I knew I didn't have a target on my back. Our mission statement was Even though Bob was only given a few months, it was a very grim and aggressive cancer, that we were going to glorify God and that we were going to choose joy no matter what. Well, we had 3 amazing years. My son was 6 when Bob was diagnosed, but he was 9 when we lost Bob. But yet, it was different because I knew that God loved me. And I knew that no matter what, that God, his unfailing grace, covered our family. I also knew that God is glorious, even when our circumstances are not. And I knew that even though I couldn't see it, that God was working behind the scenes. What I have found is that suffering is a universal experience, and no one is immune from the bumps and bruises of daily living. It is called suffering, and it is painful. As a matter of fact, the Bible predicts that we will all suffer, and that misery cohabitates with gladness, and that joy and sorrow are just part of our experience in life. 1 Peter 4:12 says, "Dear friends, why are you surprised at the suffering that you are experiencing as though something strange was happening to you?" Suffering is a part of our life. And even though we can't control our circumstances many times, we can control our responses to our circumstances. We can choose joy. So that's what I have really tried and feel a heart to do, is to help people move forward in victory and to infuse joy and hope in their lives. The life is hard, and grief comes in all shapes and sizes. You don't have to lose a parent or lose a loved one. You don't have to lose a pet. You don't have to have a prodigal child, or you don't have to have a life-altering prognosis that's grim. You know, in today's world where there's chaos and calamity and trouble and tumultuous times and violence and hatred, oh my goodness, grief can just take you to the end of yourself. You can be discouraged. You can be disappointed. Or you can say, God, what is my purpose in all of this? But what I have found is that God restores. And I've also found that life is relational and that God uses relationships. I encourage people to find like-minded people who can pray for them, uplift them in times, and even carry them when sometimes life just weighs too much. Because that's been my experience. Our family was a family in crisis, but God, in his outrageous grace, found people to come alongside us and to lift us up. I've also found that God, so many times, can use trials as treasures in disguise. And in my book, Restored, Reconnecting Life's Broken Pieces, I talk about some of the ways that God uses trial to just hone us and to be razor sharp. I've talked to so many people, and they have even said to me that even though life and crisis can be difficult, it can certainly totally change the course of your life. But so many people said if they had to do it all over again, they would choose those trials, because those trials has maybe allowed them to champion something that they never had before. Or those trials perhaps unburdened them with things that were just creating havoc in their life, or allowed them to have a new perspective, or perhaps just gave them a purpose that they never knew they had. So trials can be used by God in amazing ways. Don't forget to remember what God has done for you in the past. All you have to do is look in your brief history and see how God has carried you, has rescued you, has redeemed you. Just the fact that you're breathing, that you have a pulse, can be a true testament. He will do it again. His goal is for our restoration and our rescue. Maybe we're even ashamed of some of the things we've done. God can use that. And God can use my messy life when I thought God hated me. And yet I am able to share those wounds and to show people that because of a God who loves me so much, in fact, that he turned that around, and that now I can share with people who are struggling or who are brokenhearted that God restores. He hears you, and you are important and matter to him. I've also realized something, that how important it is to turn your grief into action. You cannot let your grief define you. And so many people, unfortunately, live as victims rather than victors. And God doesn't want us to become emotionally reclusive by being immersed in our grief. That will destroy you eventually. So what I've encouraged people to do is to be other-focused, not self-focused, because you've got to park that grief somewhere. And it is important to take time to pause and to reconnect and recollect yourself. It's very important to spend time just in recovery, just to catch your breath when something has been so difficult and so devastating. But then we cannot stay in neutral forever. Life beckons us forward. And the way that I have found, and I encourage others, and that has been my experience, is to look forward and do other things, to serve others, not to stay in our grief. In other words, to be other-focused, not self-focused. And going back to that story when I was 12 years old and sitting on that uncomfortable pew seat, I can still feel it right now. It almost brings tears to my eyes. That I felt that the Brinker family was a 1,000-piece puzzle that had been thrown haphazardly to the wind, and God was demanding that we put that puzzle back together again. And I was thinking, God, we can't even find the pieces with the loss of my mom. But little did I know, the darkest, deepest, most dismal day of my life, that day of burying my mom, was the day that my ministry started. Because it was that day that I said, out of anger, someday, somehow, somewhere, I am going to do something to eradicate this scourge of a disease that had just taken my mom's life. I made that promise to myself because I wanted to do something to help eradicate cancer that had hurt our family so deeply. So when I came back from college, I was working at a country club. And I just started a weekend for our members. Where I worked was a country club that really focused on equestrian activities. So we had a horse show, we had a tennis tournament, we had members swimming and getting pledges per lap swum. We even had a bake sale and a dance contest. It was organic, but the members loved it. And we expected to raise $2,000 for the American Cancer Society. We raised $6,000. And the next year we did it again for the members, and we raised $22,000. Basically, a movement was started. And I can't believe this, but 44 years later, What About Kids Cancer is still going strong. It's a national organization, and we've raised millions and millions of dollars for innovative, novel pediatric cancer research projects. We had many projects and support programs for these courageous kids with cancer and their parents. But that was just my way of combating this grief and putting my focus on others. And it literally has helped walk me through in victory with Jesus, my loss. So I really stress to those going through their hard time is to turn their grief into action and be other-focused, not self-focused. It is the surest way I know to recover is helping others and serving others.
The Unfolding is a Wow God production. Discover more at wowgod.com.